Federal debt will bankrupt us all. You heard it here first. No one else has said this ever. I'm the only guy to ever say that. We got a lot to talk about, my friends. I got a long video. I hope you stay for it because we got a lot to talk about. I've been working my tail off on this for over Christmas and today, and I'm done with all the stuff. I said I just got to get this out because it's insane how many people are literally, they're paralysis, man. They're like, I don't know what to do, man. We're gonna go bankrupt. The dollar's not gonna buy me a kernel of corn. It's insanity. And if you just look at them, so what we're gonna do in this video is we're going to take a walk through histoire. That means history for you non-French speakers. We're going to go through history. All right? And we're not going to go back that far, but we're going to go back some to look at what people were saying many, many moons ago. I'm going to show you charts. We'll start this video with some of the charts I've got that I want to share with you from just downloading the Federal Reserve numbers and creating my own little graphs and charts that you'll find interesting, I think. And then we'll just look at the numbers. And you're going to see the numbers say, And I'm going to show you the quotes from other people in the past. I'm going to show you the numbers today, the quotes from people today. And you're going to see to yourself once and for all hopefully once and for all, that everything they've been telling us has never transpired. It just hasn't. Doesn't mean it can't. But if history is any indication, and I think you have to say, how come all the stuff you told us before, David Stockman and various other people, hasn't come to fruition yet? Well, it's coming now. It's coming now. Okay. All right. Well, tell you what, you've been saying this since 1985, and we're going to go back even before that. Harry Byrd, who's a senator from Virginia, and others back in the 50s. I'm just going to show you all the stuff they said. None of it has come to fruition. At some point, it's kind of like Neil Ferguson from the Imperial College of London when he's calling for all these deaths because of COVID. And you're like, well, your history of calling for this has been horrible. You've never been right, ever. Why should we believe you now? And just because everyone, fear sells, man. It's just a fact. Fear sells. And as such, they want to hear, oh my goodness, we're all going to die from COVID. Oh my goodness, we're all going to go bankrupt from the federal debt. And you're like, but they have always been wrong. They've always been wrong. So why would we listen to them? Well, because this time they might be right. It's crazy. Anyway, it's kind of like the Irving Fisher thing. It's like, if you say optimism stuff and you turn out to be false, you're forever going to be known as an idiot. Irving Fisher comes to mind because he said in 1929 the market was at a permanent plateau or permanent height, essentially. It basically can't go below. And then, obviously subsequently in 1929 we had the great shock, and that lasted basically until 1954. And so everyone remembered Irving Fisher was one of the biggest economists of the time as being an idiot. How did you not see this? You see what I'm saying? It's very interesting. But yet all the people who call for calamity, and they're never wrong, they're never held to account, Harry Dent and whatnot. And it's like you can't be wrong on the optimistic side, but you can be wrong continuously on the negative side. And I don't know why. It's just nuts to me, but it doesn't. So the first thing we're going to do is going to share you right here. This is the federal debt we have. This is just a federal, not the state debt. And you can see, and we got this as a chart. It's just literally from the various spreadsheets on the Federal Reserve, from the Fred, St. Louis Fred. And you can see in 1966, which is as far back it goes, we started with $329 billion of debt. $329 billion in debt. And so today we're at 31 trillion. All right, so we've increased our debt from $329 billion to 31 trillion. That's an increase of 8.4% a year in federal debt. 8.4% a year over the course of 55 years. Longer than I've been on this earth. All right. We've also increased our interest on debt from 21 billion to 830 billion at the end of 2022. So we've increased our interest burden on debt 6.78% a year. All right, so federal debt has grown by 8.4, interest has grown by 6.78% a year. Secondly, our consumer debt has grown from $361 billion, and that's household, to $19 trillion. So consumer debt has grown by 7.34% a year, 7.34. And here's corporate debt, business debt. All right, so this is business debt, not just corporate debt, but real estate and whatnot. And that has grown from 327 billion to 20 trillion, and that has grown by 7.64% as well. So you can see, that's basically every 10 years or so, the amount of debt has doubled, if that makes sense. And over here it's every 9 years. So the federal debt has doubled every 9 years. The household and corporate debt and non-financial debt has doubled basically every 10 years or so. Everybody with me on that so far? So that's a pretty significant growth in debt, is it not? Yes, it is. Now, the interesting thing, here's the interest on government debt, and you can see it's going up from, what did we say, 21 billion here to right here at 1990 to 308 billion. And then what happened here? We're going to show you something. 308 billion in 1990. 2009 is at 354 billion. From 1990 to 2009, that's 20 years. It only went up by $54 billion. Interest and debt only went up by $54 billion. Isn't that interesting? 308 to 300 right there and 54. Huh. Weird. And yet from 1990, well, we can just look over here. 1990, the federal debt was right here, 3.365 trillion. In 2009, it was 12.3 trillion. So it quadrupled in that time. So the federal debt quadrupled, and yet the interest on the debt only went up from 300 billion to 354 billion. Not anywhere near quadrupling. Isn't that weird? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Why did that happen? Anyway, I just want to keep going through this. So if you look here, the debt increased from 1970 to 1980 by 8.25% a year annually, from 1970 to 1980. And interest increased by 11.24% annually over that same time. Interesting. And the reason for that is because the cost to service the debt was 8.9% in 1970 and increased to 12.1% 10 years later because of the interest rate hikes. And here we got 13.12% cost of service debt. And everybody and their mom are freaking out. The cost of service of debt. Look at all that debt. And that's where David Stockman comes in mind. If you haven't followed David Stockman, he was a Reagan OMB. In fact, I got an article on David. I've been looking him up right here. We'll see David Stockman right here. He was the architect of Reaganomics, but then he says it was a failure. Why do he say it was a failure? Because they were spending too much money. The budget deficits were too high, adding to the debt. It was not sustainable. So he quit. He wrote a book bashing Reagan, which all the liberal media loved. And David Stockman to this day is still talking crazy talking. I like Stockman. I enjoy reading him. I think he's got some positive stuff to say, but he hasn't been right since he quit in 1984, I guess, 1984, 1985, where he got fired, one of those two things. And the reason is because he pushed Reagan to hike taxes in 82 and 84. And Reagan didn't want to hike taxes, but Stockman said, look, we can't keep doing this. The irony of all ironies, though, is that when David Stockman was a congressman in 1978, again, this is the guy that's bashing government spending, big government spending, he voted to increase the budget to look at colonizing the moon, the space, essentially, by the end of the century. So he said, we're going to spend money to colonize space, to have, I think he said 100,000 people or 100,000 people, something like that, living in space by the end of the century. Him and Barbara Mikulski, who's a senator from Maryland, who I voted for in 1988 with my first vote. Isn't that interesting? So Stockman, supposedly the Dracula of federal budget, well, when his pet thing came up in 1978, he loved the idea of space colonization, and he voted to spend money on that. This is why it's all fake, dude. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that man behind the tree. That's all the way it is, man. And it's always like that. Don't cut my budget, cut your budget. Well, don't cut my budget, cut your budget. Well, I'll tell you what, let's both give our budgets an increase. Anyway, so let's keep going down here. I thought this was pretty interesting right here. This is this guy who was a former advisor of Jimmy Carter. Let me see what he says. Nearly everyone except the supply siders say the deficits are the main failure of Reaganomics, a failure that could threaten the country's long-term financial or economic stability. It's sort of like vampire economics, says Choate, the TRW analyst says of the deficits. It sucks your vitality. The federal government's need to borrow money to finance the deficit pushes up interest rates and makes it harder for people to buy houses, cars, and other goods, says Howard Collier, director for Ohio's budget under Republican James Rose. It's like Vince Lombardi saying winning isn't important, it's everything. Reducing the interest rate is everything. Cho said the deficit is the sharpest of double-edged swords. Imports become more attractive to Americans and foreign markets dry up for foreign goods. But again, he says right here, it's like the vampire economics. It sucks your vitality. It pushes up interest rates and makes it harder for people to buy houses. All right, let's take a look. Is that really what happened? So we're going to see right here, cost of service debt. There's the Fed funds rate right here. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. We're going to make this bigger, 150. There we go, 150%. So here's six. So here we are in 1966, 5.11 is the Fed funds rate. The cost of service debt was 6.41%. We scroll down here when deficits are going through the roof, man. I mean, look at the federal debt right here. You see right here, the Reaganomics, the debt was jumping up, and I'll show you here in just a second. Debt was going through the roof, and you can see the interest rates going up and up and up. What? But then they start dropping? What? The cost of service debt starts to drop like a brick in water, even though the debt is going up like a freaking hot air balloon. The cost of service debt went from a high right here, with that 15% or something like that, whatever that is, 13. Let's see, whatever. I can't put it on there. Was it 13.14% roughly? I thought it was 15. I thought I had 15 over here. Right, yeah, 13.84. The cost to service the debt in 1981 was the highest it's ever been. And that's basically when Reagan took over, and then it just went down, even though the debt was going up. Remember, deficits just add to the debt. And here's the debt in trillions of dollars. In fact, if we go over here, in 1990, let's see what we got here. 1984, we had an 8.9% increase in debt since 1966. So, over the 18 years, we had an 8.9% increase in debt. Again, as you can see right here, the debt is going through the roof. Now, it doesn't look like it here because this isn't logged, but it is. We had an 8.99%, basically 9% increase in debt from 1966 to 1984. Let's keep going down. 1988, debt increased under Reagan by 12.54%. The debt increased under Reagan by 12.54%. Interest rate increased the interest, I should say, not interest rates. The interest on the debt increased by 9.42%. All right, so debt was going through the roof, increasing more than doubling every 7 years, and yet our cost to service the debt was going down. It went from 13 right there to 9.87, 9.3 when Reagan left office. That's kind of weird. That's not what the economist says. Let's keep going. You guys get a kick out of this. Since 1984, there's only a 4.5% increase in interest expense. Oh, that's weird, on an annual basis. And debt increased still 10% a year from 1984 to 1994. That's weird. So the debt was still increasing in double digits, but now the interest on the debt was less than half the increase in the debt itself. Then we go here. From 2003, from 1990 to 2003, the interest on the debt decreased. From 1990, the interest on the debt was $298 billion. In 2003, is $294 billion. Yet the debt increased from $3.3 trillion to $7 trillion. Yeah, where are all these people out there? Oh, by the way, debt increase on personal households 7.7% a year from 1990, and debt increase on business households 4.82% since 1990. Debt increased on government 5.8% since 1990 by the end of 2003. And yet the interest on the debt decreased. That's weird. How did that possibly happen? The debt was going through the roof, and yet the interest decreased. And the interest rates decreased. Right here, here's the Fed funds rate, 1.13. Here's the cost of service of debt of 4.2. Let's keep going. 2014, 1.3% annualized increase in interest on the debt from 1990 to 2014, and yet the debt itself grew by 6.54% a year from 1994 to 2014. Over those 21 years, the cost to service the debt grew from 1994, which was $334 billion, to $442 billion, yet the debt itself increased from $4.8 trillion to what? To 2014 to $18 trillion. And yet the Fed funds rate now is at 0.09%. How could that possibly be? That's impossible. Here we are now, 2018. Since 1988, 30 years, the interest increased only 2.54% a year, even though the debt exploded at an increase of 7% a year, doubling every 10 years. Now we have $22 trillion in debt, and yet the interest only was at $571 billion a year. Crazy. Oh, look at here. Remember they talk about crowding out. Looks like it didn't crowd out because personal debt still increased by 5% a year. Business debt still increased by 5.1% a year. There's no crowding out there. Federal government debt increased by 7, personal debt increased by 5, private debt increased by, business debt increased by 5 as well. Let's check this out. Interest increased from 2003 to 2021, 3.9% a year. Interest increased from 1990 to 2021, 2.28% a year at the end of 2021. That's it. From 1990 to 2021, interest increased. Again, the interest that we pay on our debt increased all of 2.28% a year. From 1990, yet the debt, what did the debt do? Debt increased by 7.03, tripling the rate of interest. Oh, that's weird. That's weird. On top of that, debt increased by 7.89% from 2003 to 2021. That's kind of weird. That's not what they'd have you believe, would it? Oh, by the way, the increase in debt, the acceleration in debt is going down because we look right here from where is it? From Reagan's time, right here. Right here. Well, we can start here. From 1970 to 1980, the increase in debt went by 8.25%. The increase in debt payments went to 11.2% annually. So not only was the debt increasing, it was increasing at a less rapid pace, by the way. Not only was literally the interest on the debt that we have to pay was increasing at a much less rapid pace. How could that possibly be? That's impossible. It's freaking crazy. Now we have this huge year. Only because they all Paul Volcker advocates, and here's freaking this guy right here. This guy talks about Volcker. Volcker economics more than Reaganomics deserves credit for making some needed spending cuts, even if it didn't go far enough to satisfy some people. When the chips were down, Reagan stood by and let Paul Volcker do the very painful thing of putting the economy through the ringer and getting down inflation. Just so freaking stupid, dude. These guys love them some Paul Volcker. They love them some Paul Volcker, and Paul Volcker didn't do crap. Look, and here, so we got some high interest rates to deal with the inflation, even though inflation was already going down before they started raising rates. But again, they all say, oh, look, the rates decrease inflation. It's idiotic to say this. Inflation was already going down before the Fed, Jerome Powell, increased interest rates. And then we're going to show you this here too. I want to show you something else. Oh, so here's inflation right here. Going UK, I'm not sure what DE is. The United States, Japan, I don't know what DE is, but whatever. Doesn't matter. Germany, that's Germany right there. Deutsche Mark, I guess. So here's inflation. Did Paul Volcker reduce inflation here? His acolyte, Jerome Powell, did he reduce inflation in UK, Germany, and Japan too? With high interest rates? It's stupid. It's stupid. The high interest rates didn't reduce inflation. Let's get supply chains back. Now, inflation could come back around because, again, now we got the stupid Red Sea issue, and we got the Panama Gulf right there. The vast majority of product being moved is moved by diesel engine ships, by the way, not freaking planes flying on battery power, just not. So if you have a hard time or a bottleneck of moving product via ship, it's going to cost more money, and that's inflationary. That's supply chains. Oh, it's so stupid. But here's these guys. This is from Research Affiliates. A huge fan of, what's the name? Bill Arnott. Is it Bill Arnott? Rob Arnott. That's what it is. Rob Arnott. And the boys over here at Research Affiliates. But they're just wrong here. Federal government interest payments and defense expenditures. So they're like, look at that, Josh. Oh, my goodness. There's the federal debt right here. Interest payments. Look, we're right up. We're equaling now military. Oh, my goodness. They're all going to die. So, well, we were there here in 1996, and we didn't all die, did we? In fact, we had this explosion of military things. So instead of looking at the federal interest, and we can get this down easily, just lower the rates, which is going to happen. This is no big deal. And we can see it right here. Just look. The Fed funds rate. You can see 16%. And then we lowered it down to 3%. How could we lower interest rates when the federal debt is going through the roof? Now it's down to 1.93 in 2008. How can that possibly be true when the federal debt's going through the roof? And look at that. 10 basis points, 11 basis points, 9 basis points, 100 basis points, and then it's down again. How could that possibly happen? And here's the cost to service our debt, 2.64, which is highest we've ever had is 13.84 in 1981. And yet we've got trillions of dollars more in debt, yet the cost to service the debt is so much lower. How could that possibly be? Because interest rates are lower. How can they lower interest rates? Let me show you something here. So check this out. It's just mind-boggling, actually. Oh, by the way, we're going to show you too. GDP, well, and I don't like GDP as a measure of growth, but that's what we do. So here's GDP, or here's CPI, all right, and you're going to see. Remember, the debt was going through the roof from here to here. From 1980 to freaking right now, the debt was going through the roof. And what was happening at CPI, Consumer Price Index, inflation? Way down. You have that big jump right there for supply chain and energy issues, which is being resolved as we speak. Here is the freaking CPI. This is from the Fed. Instead of downloading it, create my own graph, I just copy and paste or did a screenshot. You can see right here, CPI 13.5 inflation. But guess what was happening? Oh my goodness, the federal debt's going through the roof. We can't evade the balanced budget. We need a balanced budget. Deficits are going through. Yeah, CPI is dropping like a brick of water. Cost of service debt dropping like a brick of water. Why? Because the Fed funds rate is dropping like a brick of water. And yet all these idiots out here say, oh, right here, it's sort of like a vampire economics. It sucks your vitality. The federal government's need to borrow money, pushes deficits up and interest rates higher, making it harder for people to buy houses, cars, and other goods. So let's see what else here. It's freaking idiotic. I'm sick of these people. All right. So now we got right here. Here's the U.S. GDP. Looks like it's going along nicely. GDP is going up. And the federal debt's going up. GDP is going up. And again, I think GDP is a silly way to measure economic growth, but that's what we do. And what's this right here? And what is the gross domestic product? Well, you can see right here, the maximum basically time we have the debts, the GDP was going through the roof. Well, it wasn't because this is not net. All right, this is gross domestic product, not net, i.e. this is before inflation. You can see it's just going down. Why is it going down? Because inflation is going down. And so now we look at real GDP on an annualized basis. This is my own chart, and I'm just using them. Real GDP, net of inflation. Looks pretty stable, doesn't it? Yes, it does, Josh. Yes, it does. Look at that. Real GDP. Look, I wonder if I can create my own trend line here. I don't know how to do it. Let's see if I can. Real GDP. We're going down a little bit. Right there, 1966 to 2021. It's going down a little bit. And that's probably because right there, we get rid of let's go to, let's chop off 19 to 2019 and see what real GDP is doing. Got too many charts, I don't feel like moving them all. But anyway, so you can see, so a little bit decline in trend line, real GDP. Why would that be? Oh, people are getting older. Older GDP, older population means what? Less growth in economic output. Why? Because older people don't consume as much. They're not investing, they're not saving, they're spending down their assets. They're not consuming that much. They're staying in their home. Remember, GDP, what's GDP? Buying a brand new house adds to GDP. Buying a second house, i.e. an already built house, does not. So again, I don't like GDP as a measure of growth right here. But anyway, either way, you can see, it's going down a little bit, not much. I mean, just look at the world. GDP throughout the world is going down. And here you can see the Fed's exact same thing. Real gross domestic product. Looks pretty stable, doesn't it? From 1980 on. Right there, we got right here. Real GDP. We got a couple negative years right there for the Gulf War, right there for the supposed terrorist attacks, right there with the great global financial crisis, right there because of pandemic, and right there because I don't even know what that. Oh, that's one they don't call recession because unemployment is still quite low. And look at that, real GDP. Not much, is it? Yeah, a little bit of a trend line. But yet the real GDP is going, is pretty stable, and yet debt is going through the roof. Interest on the debt, oh, by the way, it kind of just leveled off. And then we have this big jump right there. Look at that. If we go, let me just show you right here. Interest on the debt. From right there, interest on the debt increased 2.28% from 1990 to 2021. Even though the debt, I cannot stress this enough, increased by 7.03. Then even with the last year with the insane interest rates, which will be going down, increased still by only 3.15% from 1990. It's over 30 years. Is that not crazy? Yes. Oh, by the way, net worth, I just want to show you. Let's take a look. Oh, household net worth. What? It keeps going up? How can that possibly be? Household net worth. I thought this guy said it's going to be harder to buy homes. This guy already said the federal government's need to borrow money makes it harder for people to buy houses, cars, and other goods, and yet net worth is going up. Now, if we actually look what net worth consists of, you'll see not assets. These are assets. 160 right here, $161 trillion of assets, of which financial assets represented $107 trillion. Real estate represented right there, $45 trillion was for real estate. How much debt do we have in mortgage loans? All of $12 trillion in mortgage loans. So you have $33 trillion available to you in your equity on your home. I guess I don't want to see that. $33 trillion. Even if you attribute all this to freaking rich people. But you can see $3 trillion in checking deposits and CDs and money market. We got 3, 9, $15 trillion in money markets, cash accounts, and CDs. That's not all rich people. That's all. Government debt, another $5 trillion. Let's just say half of that. Well, hell, we'll say 75% of that is the rich people. We still got financial assets, $107 trillion. Let's just say 80% of that goes to rich people. That's still $25 trillion plus your equity and your real estate to you as a middle-class American. And yet the debt that you have right here, loans, and again, this is loans right here that you have an asset in, i.e. someone owes you money. The debt you have is only 13 trillion in mortgages and 5 trillion in consumer debt. So net worth keeps going up. Oh, by the way, I want to show you something else there too. Consumer credit. Look at that, just kind of leveled off right there. Isn't that interesting? 14 trillion, consumer debt, 14 trillion to 19 trillion over the course of 15 years, basically. That's not a huge increase each year. In fact, it didn't get back to right there for 6 years. Business debt's going, I wouldn't say it's going through the roof though. Is at what? 10 trillion in 2008 to 20 trillion in 2020-22. About 5% increase each and every year in consumer and business debt. But yet the assets, look at these freaking assets. I mean, look at this, 161 trillion on liabilities of right here, 19 trillion. Okay, that's households, Bob. That's just households. That's not businesses. That's households net worth. Oh, you can't spend net worth. You can't spend equity. Yes, you can. You can downsize. You can take reverse mortgage. You can refinance, cash out, all these different things. Crazy. All right, so let's just go back. I want to show you guys some fun. One sec. So this is from the New Jersey paper, 1956. We're going to open this guy up. It's kind of funny. The high cost of public borrowing currently is driven home by the tremendous interest, totaling more than $7 billion, which the federal government this year will pay on its indebtedness. Taxpayers in New Jersey alone will contribute almost $200 million as their share of the federal interest expenditure. Right? The $7 billion represents this year's expenditure for interest alone, not paying off the debt itself. The federal debt totaled about $275 billion, which was a fantastic amount June 30th last year. The immensity of this total becomes more apparent when interpreted in terms of New Jersey and its citizens. The New Jersey Taxpayers Association says there'll be about $2,000 IOU for every newborn babe. Every newborn baby is going to start owing somebody $2,000 a year. Interesting. The Salt Lake City, Utah, 1956. Congressional opponents of expanded grants and aid point out that 25 years ago, the federal government received 1/4 of all taxes collected in the U.S. Today it receives 3/4. And 25 years ago, all taxes took but 14% of the national income. Now these levies are about 31%. Basically, some guy added, it is intuitive knowledge that sooner or later the accumulation of power in central government leads to a loss of freedom. Once power is concentrated, even for helpful purposes, it is all there in one package where it can be grabbed by those who may not be helpful in its use. If this trend continues, the states may be left hollow shells, operating primarily as a field districts of the federal departments. That's kind of happened, but the idea that we're now living in a freaking totalitarian environment is just silly, man. Right here. Let's keep going. The remainder of about $39 billion in debt due in 1957 probably will have to be refunded. A goodly share of, refinance is what they should have said, because they did say the other thing. This is from the Tucson Star, 1956. The remainder of about $39 billion in due debt in 1957 will have to be refinanced. A goodly share of this is held by the Federal Reserve System and will present no real problem, merely a matter of exchanging issues. Interesting. So we had refi $75 billion of debt in 1956, of which $39 billion is owned by the Federal Reserve, which will present no real problems, a matter of exchanging issues. Has anything changed? No. I like what this guy says, though. This is pretty interesting. Thoughtful Americans wonder about the fate of the next generation, tax-ridden and saddled with $275 billion in debt. Taxes and the national debt may be considerably higher than the next generation. And perhaps our children or grandchildren will have to go without food, shelter, or raiment to pay off that horrible debt. This guy's great. I love this guy. Our children will have to go without food, shelter, or I don't even know what raiment is to pay off the debt. But it's also possible they may have more than the present generation have and will take it in stride. Remember back in the 30s when the national debt was less than $40 billion? There was the same gloom and foreboding about the next generation. There were long explanations of how much a dollar bills is, enough to reach the moon. So much that it'd take thousands of years for an individual to count a dollar at a time. The gloom spreaders were hard at work trying to frighten people, and they frightened themselves quite considerably. The next generation is here. If they are going without raiment, it is from their choice, not by necessity. For they have a $20,000 home, a 4,000 horsepower automobile, a lot of fine furniture and kitchen equipment. They'll select a menu, haul it out of the refrigerator, cook it, and set it on the table. And the federal debt is about 7 times what it was 20 years ago. The real worry about the next generation shouldn't be that they'll be haggled to death by the national debt. It should be they'll be wrong from having too short hours and too much money. And that guy turned out to be 100% right. So whoever that guy was, the Bryan, Ohio Times, I don't know if he wrote it or not for that place, but that guy got it. I'll show you. Oh, here's Henry Hazlitt. I couldn't believe I saw this from Henry Hazlitt, by the way. Let's see. The states and localities are now in a better position to pay for federal education than the federal government. State and local government debt is small compared to the huge federal debt. 25 years ago, the federal government collected 1/4 of all taxes. Today is 3/4, and it's high time to reverse the trend. And again, we did just fine. Right here. Oh, this was funny. This is from the Tucson. Most of this is AP or UPI, but the experts concede that borrowing, i.e. refinancing, is going to cost the government more money because interest rates have been climbing steadily. Again, this is in 1956. The amount of debt falling due in the next 12 months is the highest in years, so the amount of debt maturing. This points up the fact that the Eisenhower administration, because of booming business expansion and demands of private interest for capital, has had to abandon its heralded goal of lengthening the federal debt maturity. That's weird. We just saw that the federal debt was 7 times higher in 1956 than it was in 30 years ago. And yet the booming business demand, right here, booming business expansion and demands of private interest for capital, crowding out. Weird, it didn't happen. The average length of maturity as of August last year had dropped to 3 years and 10 months. Thus, the administration finds itself right back where it was at the start of 1953. Since that time, the administration has had to fall back on shorter and shorter maturities on new borrowings. This is a contrary view of experts who held that an abundance of short-term maturities is inflationary. And this is in 1956. On the money supply, and the lengthening the overall debt maturity is more stabilizing. In the tight money market the last 2 years, a lower yield on long-term bonds has foreclosed efforts towards extension. I thought higher debt and everything was leading to high interest rates. Yet the lower yield on long-term bonds has foreclosed the need toward extending the maturities because we can get shorter-term maturities with lower interest rates. It's kind of weird. It's almost like what they said did not transpire in 1956. And I talked about it in my book here. I'll share this with you. Right here, this from 1923 New York Times. Dollar is on the slump again by 63% of what it did in 1913. Experts studying price fluctuations foresee a steady rise in the cost of living. A plan suggested to stabilize the dollar's value. That's in 1923. Even during the boom years of the 1950s, we just talked about. Quote, the threat of inflation looms again as a darkening shadow upon the horizon of the American economy, proclaims a August 1956 editorial. A week later, a headline booms, threat of inflation shadows the economy. The article goes on to explain, your dollar is looking slightly ill again. It's losing some of its purchasing power. That is, prices are on the rise. Inflation is rearing its head. Inflation was at 2% then. And that was from actually from the BLS. Inflation was at 2%. We've been hearing about runaway inflation for decades. Decades. Again, I just like to cite this. Right here's a guy from Nebraska. Senator James Exxon from Nebraska says the U.S. was so deeply in debt it was virtually unrepayable. It's almost guaranteed that runaway inflation or the biggest tax increase are going to have to happen. Two things face us after the 1984 election. The most monumental tax increases in our history or runaway inflation that may engulf our economy and everything we know of it. Again, I talked about a video from a maven in 1987. I think it was Morgan Stanley who said, higher debt will lead to high runaway inflation because of higher interest rates or tripling tax hikes. Massive deficits leads to higher debt. And then we still got David Stockman railed and still does what the government debt and destruction would cause. But we don't see it, and it's just not there. My man, who was it that sent me a video? I can't remember. He sent me a video on how it ends. Let's see, what was it called? Let me just see if I can't. I'm not here to bash this guy. Who was it? How it ends. The game of trades. The coming debt meltdown. And I don't know what to tell you, man. Look, it's easier to be negative than optimistic because optimistic people, James Glassman in 1999 when he wrote Down, what book did he write? Hold on a second, let me look it up here real quick. Yeah, so Dow 36,000, he published that in 1999 by Kevin Hassett and James Glassman. And they just got crushed, and everyone was making fun of both of them, saying, how dare you? And one of the reasons they were wrong is they were using the equity risk premium over the yields of bonds, and you don't do that for your projections for stock growth. But everyone makes fun of James Glass. Oh, you thought the Dow 36,000. Actually, what is the Dow doing right now? I think it's getting up there. If it's not there yet, it's pretty doggone close. Yeah, the Dow's at 37,000. So he's proven correct. It just took a lot longer than anticipated. Again, I talked about Irving Fisher. I think Keynes, too, by the way. John Maynard Keynes was on the wrong end, even though he was a good investor. But Irving Fisher retired in bankruptcy, essentially. And he was just sad thing to see. But everyone remembers them, but no one remembers the guys who've been predicting the David Stockmans of the world, the Peter Schiffs, the numerous people who've been screaming bloody murder about negative stuff. No one remembers them. And yet it's sad. So maybe I'll go down as, oh my goodness, Josh, you said it was no big deal. And, look, we're eating freaking crickets or how to kill a cockroach yesterday. A cockroach, oh, Josh, you were wrong. All right, well, you can worry about it, but there's nothing you can do about it anyway other than pay down your debt. That's the one thing you should do is pay down your debt. How do you deal with bankruptcy? Is you don't have any debt and you can't go bankruptcy. That's bankrupt. That's just all there is to it. And you can't be like Mr. Potter taking your home away from you. But, man, you have assets. You have equity. You have liquid net worth. You're paying down debt. The American economy as a whole is freaking strong, dude. And this idea that what did this guy say in the video? The coming debt meltdown. Maybe I'll title my video that too. Maybe I'll say the coming debt melt up. Something like that. Just get people to click on it. So if you're still here, God bless you, man. If you're still here, answer this question. If loving the Lord is wrong, answer that question. If you're a legend, if you answer that, if you're still here and you can hear it, because you're the man or the lady, by the way. You're a legend in my eyes. If you can sit through for 40 minutes of your old buddy Josh yapping, I got nothing but respect. God bless. We'll see you.